wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the power of partnerships, because I know that a lot of the time that you're going to focus both this morning and over the next couple of days is very much around innovation and collaboration. But for me, the way that you can really have impact in both of those spaces is around the power of partnerships. And for those of you who don't know who Foodbank is or what we do, we are an organisation that is here to address one of Australia's biggest problems that we don't talk about, and that's food insecurity. And if we look at what food insecurity is, a lot of you might be thinking about it in the context of whether or not we have enough food in Australia, are we producing enough, are our farmers doing a good enough job? It's actually a little bit different. When we look at the UNFAO, food insecurity in really simple terms is about not having the means by which to regularly and routinely put a meal on the table. And you'd be absolutely shocked by the number of Australians it's affecting and the sorts of people it's affecting, because they're people like you and I. People who are experiencing food insecurity here in Australia are just as likely to be living on your street as they are to be living on the street. In fact, 4 million Australians at some point in the last 12 months experienced food insecurity. That's a staggering statistic. It's a shameful statistic. 4 million Australians. And as a mum of 2 boys, as we heard before, what keeps me up at night is the fact that 1 in 5 Australian children at some point in the last 12 months was food insecure. Doesn't mean they're food insecure every day, but at some point in the last 12 months, 1 in 5 Australian children didn't have a meal, couldn't fill their lunchbox, didn't wake up and have breakfast, not because they slept in, but because there was nothing in their home that they could access to give them breakfast. So I mentioned before, these are everyday Australians. They are honestly and truly people living in your suburb, in your town, in your children's schools, people in your community. And in fact, if we look at the biggest groups that are affected, one of the biggest demographics is single parent households. I'm a single mum, and I know how tough it can be with one income and Sydney mortgages or Sydney rental pricing or whatever the case may be. It's bloody tough. And when you haven't got a buffer in your household budget, it doesn't take much for something to happen and suddenly food becomes a discretionary item. The number of families that we talk to that are making conscious decisions between heating and eating. They can't do both. They're having to make a call on which one of those 2 things they're doing. And the other big demographic group are what we can categorise as the working poor. These are people who are employed. In fact, close to 50% of the people we assist at Foodbank are employed in some way. They're quite often underemployed, but they're employed. These are people who are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they're not quite getting there. And the one thing that we're really proud of at Foodbank, this is not about handouts, this is about a hand up. Because if you can help someone when they're at their most vulnerable, sometimes all it's going to take is a week's worth of food to give them the confidence and the pickup to get to a job interview, to get the kids to school, to acknowledge the fact that there's something going really, really wrong in the household budget or in the community or in their industry. And putting your hand up and asking for help isn't something to be embarrassed about, it's something we actually need more people to do. The other thing that might surprise you a lot is the fact this is happening in the bush. In fact, if we look at the statistics that came through last year's Foodbank Hunger Report, 1.5 million regional and remote Australians are affected by food insecurity. That's a really incredible statistic, particularly if you bear in mind these statistics were captured before the full impact of the drought. And what we're seeing right now is an overwhelming demand coming in from rural and regional New South Wales in particular, but parts of Victoria and South Australia as well, who are currently enduring some of the worst drought conditions we've seen. And for a lot of our farmers in North Queensland, who have just come off the back of incredible flooding, prior to that they had 7 consecutive years of drought. They're doing it really, really tough. So why is it happening? And I touched on it before, but if we look at the biggest #1 contributor to food insecurity in Australia, it's people are living on low incomes. If we look at, I'm not an economist and I can go into wage rates and macroeconomic climates and so on, but the biggest reason that we're seeing people in food insecurity is the fact that they're living on low incomes. And it's the reason that the Australian Council of Social Service is lobbying so hard on a campaign they're calling Raise the Rate. They want the rate of New Start increase, because if we don't start lifting these rates, we're going to see more and more of this. And I guess the best everyday language I can give you is food insecurity is like the canary in the coal mine. Because when something's wrong with your household budget, when something's wrong in the car industry, when something's wrong in a town that's really struggling in a socio-demographic sense, the first thing we see become a discretionary item is food. So we are like the canary in the coal mine. We know ahead of government when something's going wrong in a region or in an industry. The other ones are not going to surprise you at all. The other big one's bill shock. Those of you who've received a gas or electricity bill recently will know these are incredibly prohibitive costs. And when you are living paycheck to paycheck or mortgage payment to mortgage payment, it just doesn't take much to tip your budget over the edge. The other things, as I mentioned, living on a low income, rental and housing affordability, and everyday stuff. The number of people we hear where mum or dad got sick, or we've had an unexpected cancer diagnosis in the family, and suddenly one of the two income earners has to become a primary carer, and if you haven't got the appropriate insurance, all of a sudden for the first time in your life, you're going to a food pantry. And the number of families that we see that didn't even know that food pantries existed is staggering. So what are we doing about it? Foodbank is Australia's largest food relief organisation, and some of these numbers are absolutely staggering, and they still blow my mind, but we deal with this every day. So at the moment, we're currently assisting 710,000 Australians each and every month. And I know that we talked about some incredibly impressive numbers going through the health system earlier, but I see your numbers and I raise them. We're currently doing 210,000 meals a day, and that equates to 77 million meals last year. 77 million meals. We have a population of what, 24, 25 mil? Have a think about what that means in reality. In terms of the volume of food and groceries that we're moving around this country of ours, 42.8 million kilograms in the last 12 months. So yes, I'm up here in the not-for-profit sector. Yes, I'm wearing a shiny dress and heels, but we're actually a trucking and logistics company as much as a charity. The logistics involved in moving that amount of food around this country is staggering. We distribute our food through 2,500 charities, and about 40% of our total volume goes back into the bush. And we're also delivering school breakfast programs, or fueling school breakfast programs in 2,000 schools nationally. And on top of that, we're helping address Australia's $20 billion food waste problem, because this crazy paradox exists right now, where we have a $20 billion food waste problem. Households are often wasting somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 worth of food a year. That's your budget, that's your money. Have a think about that the next time you're throwing out the wilted lettuce at the back of the fridge, or the milk that you're tipping down the sink. $3,000 to $4,000 a year per family is what most Australians are actually wasting at the moment. And the reality of that, if you're into CO2 emissions and the great carbon debate and what we're doing in that space as well, we are preventing 81 million kilograms of CO2 emissions from going to landfill by our operations in terms of trying to redistribute the food that would otherwise end up in landfill. We have food bank warehouses all over the country. Every capital city has a food bank warehouse, and we also have a number of regional hubs in some states and territories as well. And food bank looks and feels different in every state and territory because it has to. The food banking model in Queensland isn't going to work in Tasmania, and the Tasmanian model isn't going to work in South Australia, and so on. So some of our states, like Sydney, services all of New South Wales and ACT from one single warehouse, and others, like Perth, have got a number of regional hubs where they're actually having little miniature food banks pop up all over the place. And as you can appreciate, with a country as vast as ours, transport is our biggest barrier and our biggest enabler. In terms of how we source our food, these are my heroes. They're fabulous. We have a network of about 70 national and multinational food and grocery donors across Australia who donate incredible product to us. And the thing I want to emphasise is, despite the name, we don't just do food. Anything that you can find in a supermarket, with the exception of alcohol and tobacco, we'll take. Because if you can't afford to put a meal on the table, chances are you're not washing your hair, you're not buying sanitary items, you're struggling to buy nappies. These are all products that are incredibly in demand for us. So we work with this wonderful network of food and grocery donors to rescue product that's not quite right. It's still delicious and nutritious, but it might be a banana that's too big for a lunchbox. It might be an onion that's not quite the right size when it goes through the testers for our supermarkets. It might be choc chip muesli bars where they've forgotten to put the choc chips in. It might be one of the wacky flavours that Tim Tams roll out from time to time that don't do well in market. Anything. It might be tins of soup that go through a production run and the labels don't get stuck on properly, so our volunteers stick them on for them. These are all of the products that we have, and you'll see across the bottom, and I'm sorry that the logos are so small, but we've got so many, they hardly fit on a slide. The transport and logistics companies that are supporting us with pro bono assistance are incredibly valuable as well, because it's not just the food, it's how we get it around. So without this partnership and collaboration with some of the most iconic brands in Australia, Foodbank wouldn't be able to do what we do. And for me, we talked about unproductive meetings earlier today. None of my meetings are unproductive. but I have FaceTime with the C-suite executives in every one of these companies to thank them. Sure, I could go in and wax lyrical about a whole range of things, but I go and I thank them and I acknowledge them and I thank their teams and I go to their town halls and I go to the opening of paper bags for these businesses, because without their people, their forklift drivers, their production crew, their cleaners, their CEOs, they're all valuable to us being able to assist some of Australia's most vulnerable people. And acknowledging people and thanking them and valuing them, I can't underestimate and I can't emphasise enough to you how powerful that is in terms of building relationships that last and building relationships that matter. One of the challenges we have at Foodbank is we don't have a supply chain, we actually have a surprise chain. We never know what we're going to get from moment to moment. I can be out at one of our warehouses and see a B-double of watermelons roll in from Catherine, and the next day it might be light bulbs. And that's beautiful. We love our diversity, but one of the challenges in that is that we often don't get the products that we really need. And we are a data-driven organisation. We check in with our charities regularly about what they need. I don't care if we've got a B-double of watermelons. I can't make a meal out of watermelons. I'm a mum, I've got 2 boys, they're hungry all the time. I can't make them a meal out of watermelons. And some of our most in-demand products also happen to be ones in the most efficient supply chains. So we innovated. We sat down and we talked to some of the suppliers and manufacturers of some of our most in-demand products, and we said to them, how do we get more of these products? Because a product like pasta sauce is an incredibly efficient supply chain. It's got a long shelf life and they're really good at what they do, so we don't get to rescue a lot of it. And when we sat down with Lego's Pasta Sauce, which is a Simplot business, and said to them, what goes into a jar of Lego's pasta sauce? Talk me through it, introduce us to your suppliers. We then set up a pasta sauce program. So we have growers in Victoria who donate their gorgeous, red, juicy, fresh tomatoes. They go into the Simplot factory in Echuca, a regional area in Victoria. 4 production runs a year they give us, free of charge, and they manufacture pasta sauce for us. The glass jars are donated at cost. Visy donates the packaging, Toll donates the transport, which means that every day in every warehouse, we've always got pasta sauce. We do that for pasta, we do it for cereal, we do it for canned fruit and vegetables, and it is the most beautiful magic that happens in our supply chain by collaborating and being innovative. And without that program, we simply wouldn't be able to give families the products that they need the most, because we can't rescue enough of them. And sure, I could buy them at wholesale value, but the gearing I can get for $1 through this collaborative supply program versus $1 buying it at wholesale, very big difference. There's some great videos on our website, and I would encourage you to watch. It's about a 5-minute video about our collaborative supply program. It is world leading and it's something we're really proud of. So how do we get our food out there? We don't go direct to the public. Primarily, we are distributing through 2,600 charities across the country, and they're household names that you would have heard of. Salvo's, Vinnie's, Anglicare, St Vincent de Paul, right down to a local soup van, a soup kitchen, a women's shelter, a refugee asylum seeker centre. They're all getting their food from Foodbank. We're essentially the charity's charity, or the kitchen pantry for the charity sector. And as I mentioned before, the other thing that I couldn't be prouder of is our school breakfast program. Because as I mentioned before, 1 in 5 Australian kids experience food insecurity in the last 12 months. And if you've had to think about what you're like when you're hangry, when you've passed hungry and you're at hangry, try going to school and learning. Try talking to the children who hide at recess because they haven't got something in their lunchbox to share with their friends. Try talking to the mums who are so embarrassed about the fact that they can't give their children food that they'd rather keep their kids at home that day. If we can stop that from happening by giving these children the most delicious and nutritious start to their day, they're starting their day with a love of learning, they're starting their day enthusiastic, and they're going to do a great job of it. And the wonderful thing is, it doesn't just make us feel warm and fuzzy. We do academic peer-reviewed research. As I said, we're a data-driven organisation. The numbers stack up, the jury is in, these programs work. And it has the most extraordinary impact in terms of school attendance numbers as well. It is an extraordinary program, and the challenge for me is the fact that education's a state and territory issue, and I'm a national CEO, so I can't press the flesh hard enough with the federal government because it's a state matter. So we're leaning on the federal government at the moment to set a policy mandate to ensure that every state and territory supports school breakfast programs, because right now the Victorian government invests heavily in delivering school breakfast programs through Foodbank Victoria. The New South Wales government, in surplus, doing an amazing job, $0 invested into school breakfast programs. We fund it entirely through Foodbank. The other thing that we're responsible for is natural disaster relief right across the country. So in addition to what we're doing routinely into the bush, we're also doing floods, fires, cyclones. We just mobilised a whole group of people on Friday to assist Northern Territory communities. We had 950 people in Katherine we were supporting and about 2,500 people in Darwin as well. And the great thing is, through that network of friends that I had on the slide earlier, I could put an email out to them late on Friday and go, guys, we are short on baby formula. We've got mums in Katherine right now who haven't got anything. What can you do? And I jumped onto Virgin and said, are you guys still able to fly? Has CASA cleared you? What's the cyclone doing? They said, great, we've got belly space in a couple of our 737, 747, whatever, big planes, that we can pop the formula onto for you. And suddenly magic happened. And when Christchurch happened 10 days ago, I reached out to our fellow food bankers in Christchurch and said, I get that you are hurting. Let us do the technical stuff for you. What can we help with? What do you need right now? And we were able to mobilise the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council and our food and grocery manufacturers in Australia to make sure they got products that they needed, halal products, because for every victim, they had about 15 or 20 family members that suddenly descended on Christchurch, and many of them were refugees themselves. So for us to be able to get care packages over to them really quickly, again, we lent on our friends because those relationships are solid and they knew the value and that we would report back to them on the impact. We're doing rock star work in terms of getting the food and groceries out to people who need it, but we're not getting enough out there. So this is the stuff that we are really focused on right now, the fact that 50% of our charities are saying they've seen an increase in demand. And we know that charities are unable to assist about 7% should say a lot more than that. Oh no, 7% of people seeking food relief every month, and only a third are getting the full quantum of what they need. So we need to get more food and groceries through our supply chain. And as I mentioned before, it's not that there isn't enough food and groceries out there. There's plenty of it. We just need to get it at the right places at the right times. Which brings me to partnerships. And I was telling this story at lunchtime, so I apologise, you're about to hear it again. But we had a really interesting dilemma that some of you may recall when I talk about it. 6 weeks out from Christmas last year, I got a call from the Social Services Minister's office who advised us that our massive federal government funding of $750,000 per annum, that's it in terms of federal government funding to Foodbank. Yes, that's my face, absolutely. I was advised 6 weeks out from Christmas that that was going to be halved as of the 1st of January. And I like to think, I don't do meditation, but I like to think that I'm normally a pretty chill person. I kind of lost it. Thankfully, I had done a workshop just the week before on mindfulness and breathing, and boy, did I do some breathing. But I made very clear to the Social Services Minister what impact that would have on vulnerable families. So it wasn't just don't cut our funding, it was this is the reality of the number of meals that I can't get to hungry people because of this decision. Will you overturn it? No. Is there scope to overturn it? No. Have you got any appetite for stopping a PR disaster in the next 48 hours? A little. And when I had a conversation and talked about those partnerships and the partners that we play with routinely, and there's a lot of acronyms there, and I apologise, Australian Institute of Food and Science and Technology, the Public Health Association of Australia, the Fight Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre, I talked through some of our friends and I said, when I'm cranky, they're going to be cranky too. So if you want to go through this process, this is the reality of what's going to happen, because I'm going to call them all up and they're going to be on the phone to you as well. It won't just be me. And they chose to call my bluff. So that was a Friday afternoon. I rang some friends in the press gallery and I said, I've got a story for you. I've got a really good story. There's an election coming up. It might be a bit political. And by Saturday morning, I was at Little Athletics, raking the long jump pit, trying to be a patient parent without coffee. It was going terribly. And I had a call from a Victorian MP who said, look, I'm absolutely appalled. I've just heard through the press gallery what's happened, because I just hadn't had time to ring all of the staffers that I should have. I just didn't. And she said, I've taken the liberty of calling Bill Shorten and I've given him your number. I hope that's okay. Sure thing, sure. Just going to try and get away from the guns. It's a bit noisy. So I went over to the sideline, and next thing I knew, Bill Shorten was on the phone and he said, is it true what's happened? Is it true that this is the decision that's been made? I said, absolutely. He goes, what's the impact? Again, it wasn't what was the process, what's the impact? So I talked him through the impact. Cutting a very long story short, by Monday morning, I was live on air on ABC News Breakfast. Things started happening. By the time I landed in Melbourne a couple of hours later, because I'd agreed to meet Bill in Melbourne for a press conference, it started trending on Twitter. Koshy had commented, Jimmy Barnes had commented, GetUp had started a petition, Change.org had started a petition. And when I arrived at our warehouse in Yarraville in Melbourne at 11:30, I walked through the door and the media team down there went, "What did you do?" I said, "I'm not really sure yet." And they said, "The National Farmers Federation's come out and slammed a coalition government. They don't do that." I said, "Well, just wait till the CWA chimes in, then it's going to get real." Anyway, I did a press conference with Bill Shorten, but the turning point for us in that day was our friends that came out in support of us. Every partnership, every partner we had came out in support of us. And by the next morning, we had a backflip from ScoMo on our funding. So we've retained our funding, as relatively insignificant as it is. But again, I tell that story, one, back yourself, you'll get a good result, but surround yourself with amazing organisations who believe in what you do. Don't abuse those relationships, roll them out when you need to, and boy, you can change history. The other thing that we are really lucky to have is incredible volunteers. We have corporates. Have any of you volunteered in any of our warehouses? Wrong answer. So in Glendenning in Western Sydney, in Yarraville in Melbourne, in fact every capital city, you are most welcome to send corporate teams out to volunteer in our warehouses. It is a fantastic day. I was in fact out there on Monday volunteering, picking and packing orders for country areas in New South Wales. Great team building opportunity. Because War on Waste did such an amazing job of profiling us a couple of years ago, we actually have wait lists in many instances. So if you do want to bring your team out, just give us a little bit of notice. But we have boardrooms available, so if you want to do volunteering in the morning and a team building workshop in the afternoon. What we particularly love to do is get CEOs on pallet jacks. We just think that's a really good learning experience, getting real. But we do make sure that it's everyone mixing in and working together. It's a great opportunity, and we couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. In fact, we need 1,000 of them every week to keep Foodbank turning. The other collaboration I mentioned before was Simplot. This is a business that has a partnership with us that is incredibly impactful and meaningful because every part of their business knows why they help us. They send teams out to volunteer in our warehouses. They've just produced their millionth jar of pasta sauce for us, free of charge. They win Foodbank awards. They are invested and committed. And when their CEO won a leadership award last year in front of all of his peers, and it was at Food and Grocery Australia, which is the peak industry event every year for the food and grocery manufacturing sector, all retailers are there. He stood up there, accepted the award, and then challenged every CEO in the room to jump on board with Foodbank in the way that Simplot has. You can't ask for partners who are more powerful as advocates than that. Flight Centre Foundation, another classic partner of ours, non-food related, but what they try to do every day is change people's lives through the joy of travel. And they knew that we change people's lives through the joy of eating. And they could see a real values alignment. And so when they came to us 2 years ago and said, what can we do that would be really cool, a bit of a world record breaking attempt, we want to pack 10,000 hampers in a day. And I went, oh my word. Anyway, they did it. They downed tools, they fundraised, and they downed tools for a day in every convention centre across the country. The Flight Centre pilot came out and did a bit of PR for us as well. But again, foundations that actually know what we do and why we do it, and they do it well. And the last one I wanted to touch on is Woolworths. And we're agnostic. We play with everyone. We play with Coles, we play with Aldi, we play with Metcash. But Woolies has been an outstanding partner of ours. And I don't know whether you can see some of those statistics on the left, but this is last year's snapshot report. And we give every one of our food and grocery donors and logistics partners one of these snapshots at the end of every year to tell them how they've helped us and what the impact is and what the social return on investment was. So from Woolworths' activities last year, $980 million worth of social return on investment through the food rescue and partnership opportunities that they have with us. They not only believe in what Foodbank does, but they facilitate it to the point that this photo here is actually one of their Woolworths distribution centres. Massive, massive factories where all the food goes out to each of the supermarkets every day. They've got a demarcated area where Foodbank is painted on the floor so that whether you're a forklift driver, a CFO, or someone walking the floors, if you see a product that isn't going to make it to a supermarket, you don't dump it, you pop it in the Foodbank area and they can know that it comes straight into our workshops, into our warehouses. The other thing I will mention very quickly before I wrap up is social return on investment. Again, data, data, data. If you can tell your partners what impact they are having, it just paints a better picture and it helps with the storytelling that we've heard about all morning this morning. We know through the studies that we've done that for every kilogram of food that we distribute, it delivers a $23 social return on investment. And when it comes to kids through our school breakfast programs, $110 for every kilo of food. When we can tell our partners that story about the social return on investment and the way that it ladders up to helping them in terms of delivering on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, then suddenly they're part of a global story, not just a local story. How many of you know about the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals? Great, this is getting better. They are goals that not only has the Australian government signed up to, but every Australian. It doesn't matter whether you're a child at school, whether you are here representing corporate Australia, representing the government, every Australian has a role to play in delivering on these 17 goals. And what we do with our partners is tell them how partnering with Foodbank delivers on every one of those goals, but particularly 5 of them. The no-brainer is SDG 2, which is zero hunger. That's what we do for a living. But 12.3, responsible consumption and production, that's another really important one as well. So again, coming back to drivers, the reason that we do what we do, if you're not ashamed by the statistics that we mentioned before, if you're not driven by this kind of social justice problem that we have with 4 million Australians being food insecure, if you're not driven by the responsibility we have to deliver on those goals, if you're not driven by the connection back into agriculture, and if you are interested in ag, I commend to you the National Farmers Federation 2030 roadmap. They have a vision for a $100 billion post-farm gate agriculture industry in Australia, and they're going to achieve it, I've no doubt. And the other argument that we are addressing is the $20 billion food waste problem. So we have a number of drivers and therefore a number of ways we can connect in with our partners. We are talking to all parties ahead of the election about the need for a national food security strategy. Because yes, we have a national food waste strategy in Australia, and that's terrific, but we don't have one on food security. We actually need to get to the root causes of why this is happening. We need to look at how we can be more efficient as a sector, and we need to make sure that our charities aren't a bottleneck, because if I could double the volume of food and groceries in our network tomorrow, I would, but I wouldn't be able to get it out, because a lot of these charities are driven by Beryl and Mavis running a small canteen or a small church group on a Thursday morning, and now they can't even lift boxes anymore because they've just turned 75. The volunteering workload, the charities that are going through such enormous change and such big funding changes, we need to make sure that whole picture is taken care of. So my last thing I will leave you with, other than hopefully lots of inspiration and energy post-lunch, is how you can help us. Because I know you are here investing in yourselves, and your employers have backed you, and you are taking time out, which I just think is extraordinary and amazing. But pick me. So how you can help Foodbank, you can join our surprise chain. If you are in the food and grocery industry, please let us know if there's a way that you think you can work with us. If you have a transport friend, if you have a packaging friend, we'd love to know about them. Advocacy, make some noise. If you are passionate about food insecurity, or you think it is a national scandal that 1 in 5 Australian children is food insecure, start having conversations. I think food insecurity is where mental health was 10 or 15 years ago. It was that hidden, stigmatised issue that no one was talking about. We need to get it out of the shadows and start talking about it. You can fundraise for us, you can invite us to your events, or you can join our boards. You are all here because you have exceptional skills in terms of governance, leadership, innovation, collaboration. We'd love to see you on our boards. Our strength is in our people, and I'd love to have every one of you talking to us about how you can contribute.